Boy, we're very intimate here.
Yes, we're intimate, yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay,
very
go.
pleased to be with Gad Saad, one of those dexterous voices out there on the right, sort of on the right, the left. Let's just say just right.
I'm an ideas man.
Notice
You
that
can't
play
label
on
me.
words,
Yeah.
dexterous voices.
Yeah, you're not sinister like a lot of people are. Now, we just got through a great lecture by you at the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. And in it, you gave us an insight into a novel idea that you're putting into a book coming out next year. Do you have a working title on the book yet?
So the working title is The Parasitic Mind. It used to be called Death of the West by a Thousand Cuts, but my book agent thought that's too ominous. It doesn't have enough hope. And so right now it's The Parasitic Mind, how political correctness and the thought police, erode free exchange of ideas. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but he wants it more hopeful. Death of the West simply sounded too ominous.
Yeah.
And he actually, and I mentioned this in the talk, he also thought that I need to spend a bit less time explaining the ailment and more time explaining the cure.
The solution.
The solution, because he doesn't want it to be sort of an anti-feminism, anti-postmodernism. Yes, explain the problem, but then offer a solution. And that's when I talked at the end about the nomological networks, that teaches people how to think better.
Isn't this nomological network idea more or less what somebody would say is just gathering information and integrating it into a whole so that you can make a reasonable solution?
Yeah, but there's a unique, if you like, epistemological approach to that. You're basically saying, what are all the, can I look at different cultures? Could I look at different time periods? Could I look at different methodologies? Could I look at different paradigms? In other words, it's much broader than the typical information acquisition process that most sensible people would ever do. It's actually teaching people that there is a broad range of data out there, that if you develop the discipline to learn how to acquire it, then many of these contentious decisions can become a lot clearer. But you really have to develop the discipline to know where to look for that data.
I guess so you have to do it in a scientific way.
Exactly. And in the talk I had mentioned, and it's worth repeating here again, really Charles Darwin had done exactly that. I mean, at the time, he didn't call it nomological networks of cumulative evidence, but what did he effectively do? He basically said, I need to demonstrate this, how evolution works, and I'm going to do it through a very systematic, methodical, judicious collection of data stemming from very different fields: animal husbandry and zoology and plant ecology and fossil remains and biodiversity. So there wasn't a singular set of data that made it compelling that his theory was veridical, but rather once he puts it all together, it becomes unassailable. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll agree that most people typically will not approach most problems with that level of information gathering sophistication. And I'm arguing that for many of the important problems that we face, you really need to develop that discipline.
When you talk about the parasitical mind, what would be the quickest way you would define that for someone?
Yeah, so the idea is that in the same way that there are biological pathogens, actual parasites that infect.
Yeah, I found that fascinating.
Right, the brains of organisms, rendering them maladaptive, right? I gave many examples, but I'll give one here for your listeners. So a mouse that is infected with a particular parasite loses its innate fear of cats. When it loses its innate fear, then it goes straight to its demise. Well, I argue that in the same way that there are biological pathogens that could be maladaptive, there is another class of pathogens called idea pathogens that also render us maladaptive in our behaviors, in our thought patterns, in our thinking. And so the goal of the book is to first explain what those pathogens are, explain the ecosystem in which they've evolved, which is the university setting, and then offer ways by which we can inoculate ourselves or free ourselves from these pathogens.
So this is kind of an analogy to the biology of the whole situation.
Absolutely.
Now, I was interested in some of your solutions that you were talking about, and I was thinking about some of the shows that Robert and I have been doing, and you're suggesting that we should pursue knowledge. There shouldn't be any identity politics. We should, promote intellectual and political diversity and curiosity. What do you do in an environment where, as we've discovered, quote unquote, facts don't matter? You know, is that a real phenomenon? Or is that just our way of expressing our frustration with people who aren't interested in fact? Or are we doing this for a third party who's watching the debate between the two immobile sides?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, it certainly is a real phenomenon. The example that I gave in my lecture when I talked about how this radical feminist was upset that I argued that only women can bear children. I mean, when you could negate a reality that is so trivially laughable as that, then it is truly a real phenomenon.
Well, it's not funny anymore.
It's not. It's tragic, right? The way I think you solve it is that you eventually. I know that they love to use the term to be marginalized. You have to marginalize them out of the pantheon of public discourse, right? Today, if you are a flat earther, you're not going to find many sympathizers of your position. I mean, there is a flat Earth society, but most people
I've never taken them seriously. I thought they were just a social group for fun.
Maybe, but the bottom line is that very few people take flat earthers today seriously, right? In the same token, you have to delegitimize these people, but do it in a manner that the data speaks against them, right? So when you say, for example, there are no sex differences, all sex differences are social constructions. Well, there is a way for me to build a nomological network to demonstrate how laughable that position is, right? I don't have to get into all emotional arguments. I don't have to huff and puff, right? So is your position that there isn't two biological sexes? Okay, let me see how I can build a nomological network to demonstrate how outlandish your position is. How your position, I call them creationists of the human mind, right? In the same way that creationism is laughable from an evolutionary perspective, well, if you negate the fact that humans are biological beings, history is not going to look kindly on you.
Now, of course, is that argument being directed at the person who's coming at you with the opposing idea, or is it really being directed at a third party? Because I found people on the other side are very, quote, the other side, are very immobile in that sense, and may never care about facts at all. And so who is the debate for?
Look, and in my public engagement, oftentimes it's exactly what you're saying. The person that I'm directly communicating with, there's no amount of evidence that I could ever offer that but there's a lot of people that are watching, right? So if you've got, and that one of the reasons why I'm so empowered by, having built such a big forum, is not for ego, it's not for narcissism, it's because you have a bigger megaphone to shape people's minds, right? I mean, and so you're right. Oftentimes, people will say to me, "Well, why did you even engage this guy? He's not worthy of your time." And then I'll answer, "I wasn't engaging him. I was doing it for the audience effect."
Now, what I've found very unique, hearing it from you, because I only hear it from us, is your focus on epistemology. Because we kind of think that's what our show is primarily about. We talk about epistemology quite explicitly and frequently, and we talk about epistemology as being, of course, the science of knowing how we know what we know.
Sure.
And you have applied this to various fields. Where do you see the weakness there the worst in the field of epistemology? Is it just in the humanities? Is it everywhere, in every department?
Well, I mean, some of the fields in the humanities don't even recognize epistemology, right? They basically,
what's that?
Well, what's that, right? Your epistemology is different, right? So there's no, if you've got Venn diagrams, there's no place where they intersect, where we could meet and converse, right?
Well, that's a very subjective way of looking at the world, isn't it? You're almost inside your own head and not going outside.
Exactly. And actually, so to speak about this sort of this inability to have an intersection of the Venn diagram, one of the things that I talk about, which I didn't mention in the talk, so I argue that fields like physics or physics or chemistry or biology have what's called consilience. Consilience is a fancy term that's existed for many years, but it was reinvigorated to the lexicon by E.O. Wilson. He wrote a book called Consilience in the late 90s. Consilience refers to unity of knowledge, right? So physics is more consilient than sociology. Why? Because it has a set of core knowledge. It has a tree of knowledge that is organized. In chemistry, you don't...
And upon which the other knowledge is based.
It's built, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So in chemistry, you don't have chemists who believe in the periodic table and chemists who don't believe in the periodic table, right? So therefore, when you're building a tree of knowledge, you at least have an organized tree that results in consilience. That's what evolutionary theory does, for example. It organizes biology across many levels, at the cellular, molecular, organism, population, ecological. Well, what happens in the humanities and the social sciences is that very, very early in any process, there is no possibility to have a conciliant tree. Some of us I don't mean me, but some people in the social sciences will argue there is no such thing as biology. Others think, well, of course biology matters. Well, already, if we have that schism, how could we ever meet? If you don't believe that there is such a thing as innate sex differences, how could we ever meet? So it ends up being a form of intellectual nihilism, right? And that's why I call it
you end up, it's a self-destruction,
Exactly.
really. And isn't there a point at which people who cannot resolve themselves to accepting some level of reason and reality, aren't they almost ostracizing themselves from society? Shouldn't we be looking at them as almost the parasite that you're talking about?
And that's why I'm saying that they should be marginalized from
Yeah.
public discourse. But for that to happen, you have to intellectually shame them, right? In other words, their voice needs to be laughed out of the battleground of ideas, right? It has to, right? It shouldn't be possible for you to stand up at the Canadian Senate and utter some of the nonsense that the senators, directed at you. That should be something that should be a career ender. But that could only happen if enough people push back against this idiocy.
Right.
If we are just a few voices in the wilderness of the tsunami of lunacy, then they're going to keep winning.
Is all of this going to be in your new book?
That's all in the book.
Oh, I can't wait for that book.
Oh, thank you so much.
And thank you for giving us some time today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's
been great.
Cheers,
Thank you.
guys. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
take care.
Cheers.